And a happy Friday and a happy Hanukkah and a happy holidays. It's Jake Brown here with our good friend Tyler Ward, aka Wardy at Wardy NYM. Go subscribe to his YouTube. Go subscribe here to ours as we're just under 3K. We're on the road to 3K. I think we'll get there by the end of Hanukkah. 8 crazy nights, 80 crazy followers, and we're at 3K. So smash that thumbs up. Keep on commenting. We love reading your comments. We're not going to read them on today's show because we got a lot to get to. We got Wardy here. Wardy, good morning. Happy
Good
holidays to
morning.
you and your family. We have the wrath of our filthy rich owner who has finally tweeted for the first time since the Mets season ended. And, I can't ever knock a bashing of my old employer. I just can't. I can't. As someone who never minds it, never. Now, he didn't really bash them. He bashed people that talked about that article. So I guess he's more bashing people like maybe me or like other people in the space or whoever he was bashing. But we'll read the tweet to start the show, and then I'll get your reaction and open us up here. Steve Cohen has tweeted from @Stephen A. Cohen too, as typical, the usual idiots misinterpreting a post article on Mets payroll for 26. I can't imagine our payroll to be lower than last year. It's always hard to predict, but that would be my best guess, end quote. And then he tweeted a follow-up saying, payroll watchers always forget to budget for waiver claims, player movement from minors to majors, and trade deadline moves. That's how it typically works, end quote. Your thoughts, Wardy?
Initial reaction was it's interesting to see Steve waking up feisty today. This is clearly something that's built up. Obviously, he's been lurking on X probably either daily or weekly, whatever the case has been since the turmoil of what's been a horrendous 2025 as a Mets fan. And I think he's just fed up. I think he really is bothered by the fact that people have continued to go with a notion that's so out of line with what the Mets are planning to do and trying to build a certain narrative. So I appreciate the fact that of any people that could kind of die down a narrative that the Mets are trying to cut back on spending, no better person to do that than the guy who actually signs the checks, right?
He also never said they're going to go above and beyond where they were at. Let's put the numbers into perspective here. They're around 295. They were at 322 going into last season. Again, like he said, you factor in waiver claims, potential trades that add to that. I think people are living in la la land if they think the Mets are spending $350 million this year. They're just not. They're not going to get to 350. Now, if they do, I think me, you, and everyone would be a little bit surprised because everything over, whatever the number is, 290, it's double with the luxury tax. So they're just not going to go that far. And I think, like you said, Steve Cohen's been reading. Steve Cohen's been reading a lot of lunatics saying, you got your casino, you sold us a fake bag of goods, a la Joe Beningo saying that, you crook, blah, blah, blah. He's not a crook. He's a filthy rich Mets fan who wants to win for him, wants to win for the fans, wants to win for his wife's father before he passes, and he just wants a championship. So to think that he's doing what he's doing just he finally got his casino and now he doesn't care is absurd. I think what he's doing is maybe changing the approach of throwing every last dollar possible because it clearly hasn't worked. The chemistry wasn't there, the wins weren't there, the team wasn't there, and maybe they're changing things up, but I still think they're going to get around that 320 to 325 number. Now, the article quoted 310 to 320. I don't think they're going to shed with the holes that they have right now, 12 to 15 million. And then you're saying with the holes that they have that they're going to go in with those holes or just put minor leaguers at each hole. What I do think it tells us, Wardy, is that they're going to be active on the trade market. I think we all realize that because these trades, one, allow you to move guys like McNeil, get rid of that contract if someone's dumb enough to eat it. Sango, who someone will eat it because I think 15 million being paid less than Frankie Montas makes him valuable. Someone's going to want David Peterson because he's only got 1 year left. That will shed 9 million. And then when we were talking about those trades, you're talking about a guy like Mason Miller who might only cost you 4 or 5. A Morejon will cost you 4 or 5. You can effectively, Freddie Peralta, $8 million. You can effectively get guys in trades that are going to give you value of a $20 million player, but really only cost you 5 to 8.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. And I think the trade route is something that you and I can universally agree upon since the start of the offseason. It just has felt like it's always been the most logical route for the Mets, depending on what exactly areas of need they're trying to address. Because the free agent class, while there are still talents out there that I think would be palatable for the Mets, whether that's someone like a Framber Valdez really shooting for the stars, even though I don't really see them going the years as of now, and a Tatsuo Imai, there's kind of a steady drop off not long after that, with the exception of guys like Zach Allen. And then when you look at the relievers still out there, yes, you have Pete Fairbanks, but his market isn't overly materializing right now. And you have to wonder why exactly is that. Obviously you have to give to get in this trade market, and no Mets fan wants to see us give away some top prospects for talent, especially their rentals. But at the end of the day, if you want to put out a better product than what you had in 2025, this is what you need to do. And not only are the Padres a very appealing team because they check off a lot of boxes for helping the Mets in various areas, if they could really pull off something significant there. But if you, of course, have the Milwaukee Brewers, that could be more in a need for need type situation, which has a level logical sense to it. The Minnesota Twins, if they stop acting like schmucks, that they won't trade away their guys when they're clearly not going anywhere, that would be a logical fit. So there are plenty avenues the Mets can go down to not only bolster their roster for the better, but not have to spend drunken sailor-esque in the process of doing so. So to your point again, when you look at the guys that are out there in the trade market, I think we can all rightfully agree that there are greater talents for the Mets to actually go ahead and land, but wanting and actually landing are two different things. And we have seen how stubborn Stearns has been in the past on his lack of adamancy to part ways with some top prospect talent. Well, the Mets a year ago missed out on a guy by the name of Garrett Crochet. You might know him. And a key factor of that was the Red Sox simply had the deepest farm available at the time. Well, fast forward a year later, the Mets are now in that position. So whether it has to do with the headlining piece in a Tarek Skubal or lesser players, they have to flex those assets while they have them at their peak now before we say to ourselves, okay, you know what? We're going to move more marginally. We're just going to make a couple free agency signings to fill in some holes, but nothing that's really going to move the needle too much. And then act surprised that we have to be a big buyer at the traded line and put a lot more pressure on Stearns when obviously no one necessarily wants to see that happen.
And also, when you have the number one farm system in baseball, as some will rate them, as ESPN rated them, you have to imagine young guys are going to get a shot. And I don't think enough fans are realizing this. One, right. You have Nolan McLean for a full season now. Like, knock on wood, he's pitching in the WBC, assuming, we obviously have bad memories. So let's just pray he gets through the WBC, which, listen, I'm happy for him. I hate it as Mets fans that his first full season, he's starting off with intense innings in March.
Both can be true, 100%.
Yeah, I mean, you got to be happy for the guy. I mean, he might win Rookie of the Year and win for Team USA, and our preferences of the three things, it would be Mets World Championship being number one. Now, uttering those words, people will say they're not making the playoffs, stingy, Stearns, dumpster diving. But the reality is they have a lot of young talent. McLean is one of them. Sproder Tong could be another one of them. Carson Benj, I envision to be a starter. Like, there were points that these fan favorites that left that a lot of people are still sad about. They were at this point. Pete Alonso, he was in the system. They called him up. Brandon Nimmo was in the system. They called him up. These guys were here. So I don't think you're going to see 10 rookies on this team, but you're going to see 4 or 5 key players that may not have a lot of experience who are coming up here, and the Mets are going to give it a shot. I think first base, it's pretty clear they trust Ryan Clifford, not at the start of the season, but either at the end or in 2027 to be their first baseman because they're not committing long-term there. So I'm not entirely against WARDY, the short-term commitment notion here, because we don't know about the lockout next year. We don't know for sure there's a baseball season next year. And the Mets got it. They're still getting out of their old ways, getting out of these old contracts, and seeing what they have internally. To me, the Padres trade without Mason Miller makes a lot of sense because you're not giving up the farm. You address your rotation with the Pavetta. Morejon was one of the best relievers in baseball. Morejon had a better year than Mason Miller. Like, not enough people are talking about, yes, Mason Miller throws 103 miles an hour, but Morejon had a better year than him. So you're getting him for a 1 year. I don't think you're giving up Jet Williams, Jonah Tong, Brandon Sproat to get 2 or 3 rental players if you get Laureano as well. So I keep looking back at that trade of short-term, not a lot of money, not giving up the farm, and addressing multiple holes, that it makes too much sense for the Mets and Padres to not do business.
Yeah, and this is something that I know has caused a lot of fans to be at a divide of trading for rental assets in particular. Not just Tarek Skubal, who fans are really divided as to. There's a contingent that love the idea of give them whatever they need because we are confident that we're going to be able to give them a long-term contract because Steve Cohen has the money in ways that no one else really can, as long as he ponies up the dough. But then you also have the Tarek Skubal types on the rental contracts where you could argue it's really justified to go after them. Same thing with Freddie Peralta and same thing with some of the other talents out there. But for me, where I have fallen in the category of is making sure and praying and hoping to God that the Mets don't put themselves in a position where they land a lot of short-term pieces as they've done in the past under Stearns, especially entering 2024. But what worked in 2024? A lot of magic happened in 2024, but that's not something you can just rewrite. And the Mets were solely dependent on bounce back candidates or players coming off of their best year in a number of years. And you simply cannot construct a team year in and year out with that exact philosophy because it is going to lead to disaster. We saw that happen in 2025 for this New York Mets team. It was headlined by their rotation failures. But what did their rotation failure headline? It headlined a lot of uncertainty. A lot of guys that were coming off of either down years or coming off of their best seasons in a while, and they just weren't able to replicate that either because of a lack of health or a lack of consistency. You look at Jorge Polanco, love the signing. Again, Mariners fans are still crying about it, understandably so. He was their playoff hero. He was one of the most clutch batters that they had all year long. He had the most drastic rise in OPS and production among like all eligible players in baseball this past year. A lot to love about him. Hits well from both sides of the plate. But the problem with someone like Jorge Polanco isn't necessarily himself, but rather if they continue this philosophy. Polanco just had the best season of his career since 2021. He's entering now his age 33, 34 season or so. He's not getting any younger. A guy who DH'd 75% of the time last year, roughly, for the Mariners. Someone that you really don't want to play anywhere outside of DH more than anything else. The Mets cannot approach heading into 2026. And I want to know if you agree or disagree with this notion on the mentality that we're going to solely bring in short-term fits, but guys that are either coming off of down years that we're hoping to throw in the lab and get the best out of again, or guys coming off of their best years, but don't really have the previous track record to suggest that they're ultimately going to be able to replicate that, especially in a big market, because Stearns has failed miserably over the past year and a half, going back to the previous trade deadlines of trying to bring in guys from small markets that simply have not adjusted here. Could there be a difference from landing guys in the offseason versus a deadline? Absolutely. There's a lot less pressure on them. Doesn't change the fact, though, that there's a lot of uncertainty there, especially if you're going after guys that, again, are on these rental deals. So I'm for the Morejon types that are rentals, Ramon Laureano's, except Nick Pivetta, because he really is going to opt out after next season more than likely. I'm down with all that. But I want to know your thoughts on the following, that Stearns goes with this philosophy of really going after guys solely that are off of bounce back years or coming off of guys that are coming off of a down year looking to do more.
I think that's his bread and butter is down year. They're going to come back. Devin Williams being that perfect example. And guys who haven't done it long term, you could say Jorge Polanco has been one of those inconsistent pieces who's coming off arguably his best year and doing it in a stadium that is not meant for hitters to do what he did in Seattle.
Which is impressive.
Yeah. And I think that's a good sign. And, I think he likes that these guys come from New York in a Weaver and a Williams, like two guys that did it in New York. Now, Weaver did it a lot better than Williams did, but Williams' track record has shown throughout his career that he's been one of the best relievers in the sport. So that could have been one bad year, some bad moments. He got booed within a week at Yankee Stadium. Opening day, they'll boo you out of the Bronx. We're like, we'll give you a couple of weeks before we'll wait till Memorial Day maybe at Citi Field to boo you.
I don't know about that. Francisco Lindor's start in 2021 would beg to differ.
How about Cinco de Mayo? Can we give you to Cinco de Mayo at least, the first holiday in May, and at least you'll be drinking and then you're yelling on Cinco de Mayo? That's fine. That's a difference. But yeah, listen, it might not work, but I'm not against trying something different. And what I do like what Stearns is doing is bringing in winners and clubhouse pieces. And what I mean by that is Marcus Semien. I know there's been that reported rift that just came out between him and Corey Seager as that being a reason he was gone. I think what that told you was Semien was a workhorse, wanted to win, and Seager may have been a little bit lazy, and Semien didn't like the laziness. Well, we know about the laziness that happens internally because Tommy Pham tore the Mets apart for their laziness.
Yep.
So listen, I think he's pointing at guys like a Starling Marte. As much as we all love Starling Marte, I think some of how Marte plays and how he acts is some ways lazy. And I think there is some laziness that goes on. Maybe he was talking about Lindor. I don't know. But I don't think Lindor is part of the problem. And I think the Mets know more than the fans do. And I know they're sad about Nimmo and Alonso. And I've texted with you about this. We've talked about this. I think this is the best thing possible for the Mets to give a fresh start to this clubhouse. Now, I get there's holes, but I think they do trust their talent internally. Carson Bench was David Stearns' first pick. Like, that was his first draft. He took him, and there's a reason why he's rising so quickly from single A to potentially the big leagues in just one season in the minor leagues. It doesn't happen.
Right.
That's how much faith he and this organization have. Eric Chavez has it. He's doing his stupid Instagram stories all day saying about how Benj is going to be a star. So
we don't need to talk about Eric Chavez.
Let's try and not mention him today. But I do think there is more talent internally than and I know it's not the sexy names, like if you go out and get a big name, But I'm not against bounce back short term guys until we see what happens with the lockout next year. And I think that's in the back of their mind. I don't think it has anything to do with the casino. You got their casinos. Maybe some of it's Stern's approach and being a little stingier, but I don't know. So, look, listen, some of these long-term deals they're going to regret down the road. Like that Pete Alonso deal to me is insanity. He's going to break down. He's going to be a DH. I agree for the Mets not giving him that deal. So it's got to make a lot of sense. The most recent one, which let's talk about this now, Michael King, 3 years for $75 million. Now there's an opt-out after both year 1 and 2. You would have had to give up 2 picks. And this is a guy that's going to opt out. Now, the short-term thing I think the Mets love, but giving up 2 draft picks for Michael King with a guy who doesn't have a ton of durability and a lot of injury concerns, the Mets don't love. So what's your reaction to King going back to the pot? How could you get mad at him? I mean, he's going to San Diego. It's a beautiful place to live. Best weather, beautiful women, great food. I mean, it's Pleasantville in San Diego, Wardy.
Yeah, I was just saying that last night on my platform. You guys got to understand there's so many wrinkles and factors that go behind player decision making, and it was clear as day that as soon as Kane inked back with the Padres on 3 years, $75 million, the same money as Shamania's deal with the Mets, but just so differently structured. As soon as you saw that structure, it told you all you need to know. Let's not forget, Michael King accepted a contract a year plus ago with the Padres that was also very unique in payout. Nick Pivetta, when he signed with the Padres an offseason ago, was only making a base salary, I believe, like $2 or $3 million, but the bonus was really inflated. Why? Because the Padres, again, don't have a lot of money that they can flex at the moment as they continue their ownership turmoil, but they still want to be a competitive club. So what are they doing? They're selling on the fact that we're still a very good team on paper, one of the better ones in the National League, and Michael Caine had great success with them as part of that Juan Soto trade, dominating 2024 to being a Cy Young worthy type pitcher. He looked that good for that organization. And after having a down 2025 due to injury that we saw, it was prime time for Preller to say, listen, we know you love San Diego. We know you don't want to leave. Let's just give you something where you basically have full control on your future and go from there, because we can't afford any more long-term commitment, okay? Seiler, may he rest in paradise, before he passed, was throwing out long-term contracts like they were candy out of desperate need to see if that organization could win before he was no longer with us. Sadly, that did not happen. Now they have to deal with all the unfortunate realities that come with that. So Preller needs to be due diligent on landing these really unique creative contracts. And Kane was never going to sign a structured deal like this with anyone else. Even if the qualifying offer wasn't available, it simply was not going to happen. Unless the team blew everyone out of water, say going 4 or 5 years on a much higher AAV, the likelihood of Kane leaving the Padres was clearly slim. He obviously loves his time in San Diego. And to your point, if you are in the shoes of a player, and I understand that people who are watching this who have never been to San Diego can't really understand, and that's okay. I'm talking to the people who either reside in San Diego or have been there at least once, okay? There is a universal understanding that everyone that goes to San Diego more often than not loves it there, regardless of the taxation, regardless of maybe what you don't love about California, depending on who you talk to. The fact that you can go 10 minutes to a gorgeous beach, you can go 10 minutes to basically almost like a secluded island where all the players live, 10 minutes downtown, 10 minutes and you're right across the border there. And then before you know it, you're in Tijuana. Like there's so many different avenues and players love that. They love being in that warm climate of a perfect 70 degrees all year long. It's so practical and ideal for training. It keeps them feeling fresh. And if you're Michael King's shoes, if you could pick between being in San Diego for half a season for at least the next calendar year versus any other location for Major League Baseball, you're probably picking San Diego. I don't think there's many other places you want, especially if you're a guy that enjoys the West Coast and all that it provides. So again, congrats to Kane on getting that contract. But as much as we love to kind of pick and prod Stearns and what he has done wrongly this past year, this is not a circumstance that falls in that category. There were so many logical reasons as to why he went back to the Padres. And as you said at the start of this conversation, Michael Caine had the qualifying offer. So is a team really going to go out of their way to give up multiple draft picks and bonus pool money potentially just for the sake of bringing in a guy that you're not even going to have locked down beyond a year? It wasn't going to happen. So Michael Caine, would have loved him. Ain't going to happen. Let's see if he can now bounce back and have a fully healthy 2026 for San Diego.
Yeah, people got to realize. Listen, I love New York. I'm likely moving back in April. I live and breathe New York. Anyone who knows me knows I rep New York wherever I go. If I'm in Philly, I'll still have my OMG sneakers on, even if they're too dumb to realize that they're really Mets themed sneakers. I'll wear them. So I always rep it wherever I go. You rep it out in PA. We rep it. This is just we rep our team. you're not from New York, but you love the
Oh, I am
Mets.
from New York.
You love. Are you upstate? Where in New York are you from?
I'm from Long Island.
Oh, you are from Long Island. I don't know why. When did you leave Long Island?
Years ago. That's
Okay.
why. I've been in PA more than I've been in New York. That's why.
Okay, so you are originally from New York, but there is something about being New York. But you have players who have never lived there. You have player wives who factor in who have never lived there, who only hear about how expensive New York is, which it is. And when you talk about like deferred money, oh, just defer everyone like the Dodgers. You can do that easier in LA when the weather's great. You're going to win a championship. You're going to make extra money from winning a championship, and they're a dynasty. It's a little bit harder to defer $50 million when you're living in New York, and getting a nice apartment might cost you a couple million in itself. So it's just different circumstances completely. So I totally get it. Another guy signed with the Padres is Sung Moon, which brings me to my next point. I probably butchered that pronunciation completely.
That's why I just had a smirk on my face. It was fun to see you break that down.
Do you want to pronounce that one?
Actually, where's his let me find the post for the Padres on the signing. Let's see if I can nail it on first try. I've never said his name before. Let's see. Okay, here we go.
Yeah, you give it to me.
Okay. From MLB's website. Padres infielder Sun Moon Son reportedly agrees to a deal per multiple reports from Mark Feinsand. So he's on the move. He was the top guy coming out of the KBO this year, I think, for the hot corner. We know the Padres love those guys from the KBO. They famously did that, the man by the name of Ha-Seong Kim a couple of years ago. Loved his cigarettes, but also loved some great defensive play. He did that often when he was in San Diego. Let's see if Mr. Son brings anything of similar value to this Padres.
See that spelling? How am I going to guess that pronunciation? I'll always
remember
my
brother
as
well.
My brother lost like a poetry contest in high school to Pan Fan, and that is a name that lives with me forever. It's just a great name.
I believe that. They have some names that are like, for example, I'm trying to think. Like there's some guys' names that are like two the same. Like first and last name are the same. Like even separate from like Korean or Japanese culture. Like I see that in Spanish culture to a degree as well. And every time I see that happen, I'm like tongue-tied because I don't really know how to read it. It trips you up when you're not used to seeing that more than anything.
It's interesting. The Seahawks, who just won last night, their punter's wife's name is Bailey. Her first name is the same as her last name.
That's just wrong, in my opinion. Like I think you're doing a disservice to your child if you're the parents of that individual.
She should have either kept her last name or found another man that didn't have same last name.
Go with the nickname like Bales or something. You got to mix it up.
Well, two last names that I can pronounce, maybe not the first names, are Munetaka Murakami and Mr. Akamoto. I'll call Mr. Akamoto like Mr. Koo, one of my favorite Mets pitchers of all time, who scored off a double off Randy Johnson. Those are two names that aren't mentioned much. Murakami's intriguing because when I record this show on Monday, that's when his posting day closes. And we've heard no reports of where he's going. We just know he's like the home run king over there. And Akamoto, we know as the guy who's a bit more versatile, a better defensive player, and another guy who's hit 30 or 40 homers in a year over there. Do you see now with payroll, with where the Mets going, any sense that they end up with one of those two players?
Do I see it? No. Would I like it? Yes. I think that's a really important distinction to make because when you look at the current markets, let's start with Akamoto, for example. I like him a lot. I actually like Cosmo Akamoto more as a team fit than Murakami because Akamoto not only has essentially like 6 or 7 versions of the Gold Glove and the MPB, but he also is someone who's been the captain of the Yomiuri Giants for like a decade straight. He's the first position player ever to be posted from the Yomiuri Giants in Japan. So that's a big deal. He has a swing that is a follow-through eerily similar to David Wright. I'm not exaggerating. Look at the highlights. You see them side by side. It's actually pretty cool. A guy that's a well above league average defensive third baseman. First base, he's above league average. And you could even throw him in left field if you really want him to. And he wouldn't be like Lucas Duda out there. Like he'd actually be fine. So Akamoto, the most appealing thing to him is the fact that he supposedly is down to sign wherever. Like from everything that we've seen at this point, he apparently, and this could be wrong, but he apparently doesn't have much of a preference as to where he goes, which is always a good thing when you're trying to land guys from Japan, because we know how meticulous or how anal that they could be about being either out west or being with a very specific big market organization that maybe the Mets pale in comparison to. So Akamoto makes the most sense from a team fit, especially after bringing in Jorge Polanco. He makes so much sense for the Mets to maximize versatility, a plus bat, and someone that should hopefully do very well in his clutch numbers because he was unbelievably clutch, especially with velocity in Japan. So those are all things that are appealing for I believe he's turning now 30 or 31, getting into 2026. But for the Mets here, are the Mets going to really commit to someone like Okamoto to essentially be more of their first base profile and platoon with Polanco? I'm just not sure. I think that level of uncertainty rings true to the degree that the Mets will not be serious suitors in the end. I hope I'm wrong because I like him a lot, but jury's still out there. And Munetaka Murakami, there's been this widespread belief that Murakami can't hit a lick on velocity, 93 plus. That's what we've known since the offseason has started. Since then, I've done more digging, and that's factually incorrect, actually. And I've corrected myself on my platform about this. I'm not sure if you've spoken on this either, but Murakami's numbers with velocity isn't nearly as bad as what we were making out to be. He's actually very much in line to have a lot of success at the major league level. His numbers are actually eerily similar to Shohei Ohtani's during the time of Ohtani being around that same age in the MPB. And I think Ohtani's doing fairly well with handling MLB pitching. I don't know, you correct me if I'm wrong there. So Murakami has a floor that's lower than Okamoto. That's the lack of appeal. He can't play defense. He makes Mark Vientos look like a platinum glove at third. And I wish I was exaggerating. I'm really not. So he's a guy that's probably going to be best fit in that DH spot more than anything else. And I think because he's going to be best fit in a DH spot more than anything else, it's hard to envision why the Mets would sign him after Bernie and Polanco, who again had over 70% reps at DH this past year. Like if Stearns is really adamant on run prevention, then okay, this is where it should ring true. If he counters that and lands Murakami and gives Murakami the bulk of DH, maybe sometimes at third, and then mainly Polanco at first, then it's more evident by the day that this had less to do with Alonso's lack of defensive value as it did the Mets just simply never want to lock down a profile like him for more than a couple years. And whether you think that's justified or not justified, you're entitled to feel that way. Like, I personally disagree with you entirely on Alonso's contract of 5 years just destined to be a failure. I don't think that's true at all if Alonso's going to shift more to DH as he continues into his early 30s. But the counter is if he doesn't, I could see where what you're saying actually may hold true, make more sense. Because as soon as that bat falls off for Alonso, should it fall off in each of the next couple of years, so does his entire game. No different than Luis Ariz, who is a contact king, but it's terrible defensively everywhere he plays. So as soon as someone like Ariz loses his value with his bat, there's nothing else that he has to positively provide for you. I think the Mets looked at that with Alonso and just said simply they don't like the commitment with him after a couple years. We'll see if that works out in the end or not. But in the meantime, Murakami Okamoto, would I love either? Yes, but I'll be genuinely surprised if they signed any of these guys from the MPB at this rate.
Yeah, and I think that's why I'm pointing to trade. All signs to me keep going back to my guy, Yandy Diaz in Tampa, and why it makes so much sense. Right-handed. I know defensively he's not great, but he's still better than Jorge Polanco because he's actually played first base.
And he's better than Pete. It's a low bar. So
yeah, slightly, he's better than Pete defensively. He's going to hit you a good average and good on base of 360. He's going to hit you 20 to 25 homers. He's going to drive in a lot of runs heading behind Juan Soto. All signs, $12 million, a $13 million option the year after. The money is not bad. You can move him to DH if you decide to call Ryan Clifford up. There's a lot you can do with Yandy Diaz as a righty that makes sense to me. Jaron Duran's another cheap name on the trade market. I don't know if he fits into this clubhouse as much as a Yandy Diaz would, but Jaron Duran's a name.
With Duran. I like his personality a lot. He's the kind of guy that's like very boomer bust. But like he had a 7-WAR season almost in 2024. He went from being like one of the best outfielders in baseball to defense falling off a cliff. So if we want to talk about bounce back candidates and the trade market, there you go, Jake. Step right up and meet Jaron Duran, the starting outfielder for the Mets in 2026.
Yeah, and Buxton's the other name now. Durability is always the concern with him, but another value guy. If you throw them a McNeil and you take on a Pablo Lopez contract, I can see a Pablo Lopez Byron Buxton combination there. Maybe you give him Sanga McNeil and Jet Williams and Jonah Tong, and you get those two. It's going to cost a lot, but you guys got to realize it's probably going to be in trade. So I'll close with this. Bellinger, the latest name. He wants 7 or 8 years, Wardy. It does not feel like he'll get that from anyone. Definitely not the Mets. And at this point, if we're at 295, Cohen's talking about waiver claims. They're probably not going to go above 325, which is still above where they were at last year. It doesn't feel like Bellinger's happening unless they move for contract. And remember, in a McNeil trade, the Mets are probably going to have to eat some of that contract. I don't think any team wants Jeff McNeil if they're paying him $16.5 million in 2026. So as much as you'll move some of that deal, you're probably still going to have to cover like 7 or 8 million of that deal. So it feels like Bellinger, as much as I think a lot of us would like him, he feels like somewhat of a pipe dream at this point.
Yeah, Bellinger's a tough one to evaluate because I'm sure you've spoken about this plenty in previous conversations regarding him, but he, just from a player profile perspective, is without a doubt the guy who checks off the most boxes. If you're really looking at it, a plus bat still, regardless of his road and home splits, guys, I understand it's easy to buy into that, but Bellinger's fluctuated with his offense with various organizations, so I don't think that this is something that we should just look at the Yankees and be like, oh, that's what it is. No, like, do you blame the guy for getting comfortable in a batter's park half the year that he played in versus being in random ballparks all throughout the year, and ballparks that he really rarely goes to, mind you, because now since the schedule changes happen, we have to be everywhere instead of just playing your division rivals for like 20 plus times a year? I think Bellinger makes the most feasible and logical sense for the organization to make a big splash, to land a guy that can help them stay unbelievably creative with their versatility. I think Stearns wants that. I think not only Mendoza wants that for lap configuration, but Belly's that kind of guy that, again, if you bring in and say you could have him starting at first base one day, have Polanco at DH, and then have your outfield, have Tyrone Taylor out there, unless Bench has already proven himself. With the assumption that you landed another outfielder to kind of help balance things, so things look better than what they did last year. Or you could go down the route of, if you really want Bellinger to get more consistent outfield reps, you could do that if you let a more defensively minded first baseman like a Ryan O'Hearn or someone along those lines on a shorter term contract. So I think Bellinger is still very much a fit for this Mets team, as I do think Tucker to a lesser degree. But to your point, I will be somewhat surprised if they land Belly, but not overly. I think there's really something to be said about the Mets prying a lot of these former Yankees away, and it has a lot to do with the fact on how they handle this market, what they bring to the clubhouse. He's a World Series champion, MVP caliber player. People have universally loved him everywhere he's went. And the Mets will have to, again, flex their financial muscle in ways that they really haven't done that this offseason. I mean, they overspent for Jorge Polanco, great, but are they going to overspend and actually get to 7 years for Belly to separate from every other team that may be sitting 5 or 6? It's hard to envision that. It's hard to envision that unless they're like, Belly is our guy, and we're going to commit to him fully because he was always the player profile we preferred on a fairly long-term contract in comparison to Alonso. Because then you say to yourself, Jake, if the Mets landed Bellinger, and let's go hypothetically 6 years, are you worried about the back end of that contract? Because for me, I look at this Brandon Nimmo trade and I say to myself, the Mets were able to get out of the 5 remaining years of that deal, save around $30 million by bringing Semien because he's on less years of a contract. And they're probably not even going to have Semien on this team after a year or two. They're more than likely going to dump him before that contract is entirely done. So if they have the palate to do something like that, why wouldn't they feel a level of comfortability to do the same with Bellinger years later? Unless the CBA is what really changes everything. I'm curious, what's your thoughts on that?
It's 100% factoring in. I mean, you can't think that next year and what's about to happen is not factoring into the Mets' decision. And I think that's where Mets fans who are calling stingy Stearns, Mets cheap, they have no money, are not realizing things are changing very soon in the next year or two. And this is about what's going on behind the scenes and the meetings that are going to happen next year. Numbers, CBA, everything's going to completely change. And, the hope is that we have a 162-game season, but we might not next year. So
probably won't, sadly.
That's why I think the Mets love these potential rental pieces without giving up the farm. And I keep pointing back to this, and I know you got to go, so I want to close with this and get your thoughts, and then we'll close up. Sure. The Mets are going with the Toronto Blue Jay model of we don't need $30 million at every – go through – I'm on Baseball Reference, just Blue Jay stats, look at their stats. Outside, George Springer was their only 30-homer hitter. They did not have one guy with 100 RBIs, and they were 2-step lead from third base from beating the Avengers in the World Series. And they did it with Vladimir Guerrero, George Springer, Bo Bichette.
Vladdy didn't even have 30 home runs last year in the regular season.
23 and 84. No one in that lineup blew you away. Bo Bichette had 94 RBIs. George Springer had 32 and 84. You look through that lineup, there was a lot of internal guys that an average fan had never heard of. An average fan hadn't heard of
Bernie
David
Clement,
Schneider,
dog.
Ernie
Playoff
Clement,
dog.
Addison Barger, Nathan
Dog.
Lucas, for Christ's sake, Miles Straw, Tyler Heineman. Like, they did not have players that were household names, Wardy. And that's
Tyler,
why
the parking lot Kane, if you know, you know.
back that ass up. And the Mets don't need a Juan Soto at every position. And that's when I think fans need to realize it may not be the sex now, looks-wise. Jorge Polanco's a good-looking guy. He's jacked. He's lifted. Like, they got the looks, but it may not be the sexiest names on this roster. But the Blue Jays just did it without the sexiest names on the roster, and we're about to take down the Dodgers if IKF took 2 more steps off at third base. And that's where it takes trusting internal talent, trusting your evaluators, trusting clubhouse pieces. You want to talk about a team that was together. You know those guys partied off the field. They had the jacket. They had everything going on. The Mets had a selfie in front of a camera. Like, let's be serious. So I think they want the right clubhouse, chemistry, internal pieces, and not just $30 million at every position. And even internally, Yasevich, he turned into a star in front of our eyes. He was in single A the month before the playoffs. So that's McLean, that's Benj. So we have to realize other teams are doing it without spending $350 and trusting talent from within. And I think that's what David Stearns is doing. And if he's going to do it different than the colossal failure of the 2025 Mets, I'm not going to hate him. Sorry, I know I went on a tangent ranting there, but I'm fired up, Wardy.
Yeah, no, I love the passion. I think there's 2 clear things I'd like to highlight, and then we can wrap this up. One, I don't think Stearns is currently operating in fashion that's at all far off from how he's done the previous 2 years. I think that is in part why fans are having the reaction that they are, because Stearns had it work in 2024 with a lot of luck, a lot of great clubhouse morale, among others, but you can't depend on that yearly. And we saw how much that flopped in 2025. So that is my immediate counter is like, I'm all for Stearns getting creative, but he also needs to get creative in ways that he has not done in previous years. And he needs to actually take advantage of having an owner that's willing to give you close to a blank check, depending on the player you're going after. I also look at this Blue Jays team, and you bring up a lot of great points on their youth movement and how they thrive with that. And that's a route I'm sure the Mets want to go down next year, headlined by their starters from McLean and to lesser degree, Sproton, etc. Christian Scott, dog. No one's talking about Christian Scott. I'm telling you, he's going to look good in spring.
And he's ready. He's ready for opening day. He's ready.
He's been ready for like how long now? So that's awesome. But here's the problem I have with the Toronto Blue Jays, okay? Their man in Shapiro, who they just extended to a 5-year contract to after getting them the World Series. It took him a decade for that to happen. So let's just bear that in mind. It took him a literal decade to get them to that point. Let's also bear in mind, what did the Blue Jays do this past playoff that the Dodgers were able to do? The Blue Jays were not able to get over the hump and win the World Series. So I hear your point as to, okay, we have a lot of youth movement and we have veterans, and this is great balance, but it still didn't lead to a championship in the end. I don't care about, the Blue Jays were the better team, this and that. They never were. And you want to know why? The Dodgers were able to drag their feet most of the playoffs and not lose their sleep over it or on their offensive end because how elite their pitching was. And that is what the Dodgers do to separate themselves. That is why the Dodgers, even after winning back-to-back championships, look at the upcoming CBA and the impending lockout and say, we still need to make big moves now. That's why I admire so much about that organization. And maybe you could say the Mets, even if they say Lana Tucker, make a blockbuster trade for a Skubal, they're still not in position to match the Dodgers. If you want to feel that way, that's fine. But for me, I want to see this team put out the best product to win next season. And in my opinion, you are not doing that if you solely rely on these short-term options and your youth moment. Because as soon as injuries start to build up and become a problem, as soon as David Stearns has another trade deadline where he does not move the needle enough in areas of need for this team, he tried his best with the bullpen, but also didn't necessarily have the right vision on going after solely guys from small markets for the most part, headlined by Helsley. Like, I understand it's harder because not a lot of big market teams are selling at the deadline. That is true, but the point stands. I hear you, and I love how the Blue Jays were built last year, but that still was not enough to get over the hump. The Mets need to look at that Blue Jays philosophy, take the youth movement, but then allocate the spending in areas where they need to most. Would you agree or disagree with that assessment?
I would agree, but I just think fans either way, they're already pissed because their boys left. And I don't care because I want them to move on from the core. And I get it. I get in the tweets every day, the comments every day. I'm not going to a single game for the first time in 50 years next year, which to me is utterly ridiculous because you root for the Mets. So you don't root for the New York Nimbos, the New York Alonsos, the New York Diaz's.
You're fans of them because you're a Mets fan. Let's start with that.
Yes, you're a fan of the team before any individual player. So I agree. Money has to be allocated right, but there also has to be internal success, which they have not had enough of, especially on the offensive side of the ball in a while, like since these guys essentially got here. So we're going to have to see that. And I think this is the year we're going to see it. By the way, as we're recording this, Brandon Lau, as they're finalizing trade where he's going to be traded to the Pittsburgh Pirates in a 3-team deal. The Astros, Pirates, and Rays. Right-hander Mike Burrows to Houston, Lau to Pittsburgh, involving multiple other players. So the Rays open for business. Give me Yandy Diaz. They're open for business.
You want to know what's so notable about this? I'm going to talk about this in my video today. I'm so glad that happened right at the buzzer, literally. What was reported at the traded line when Lowe was not traded in the end? It was that the Rays wanted to stand pat, hold on to him because they were having their ownership, front office change a bit, and they wanted to go into a direction in the offseason where they would be maybe a little bit more of a level of a spender. Well, that hasn't held true all that much to this point. The Rays are going to continue to operate in a way where they're going to maximize their trade assets. And of course, by the time they dump someone, they will properly develop someone to fill in those shoes without a problem. That's why no one at all talks, and understandably so, thinks about Wander Franco because of the dominance that they just had with their young infielder this past season. Like, they're just so good on turning their previous prospects into some of the best players in the American League. But that's a fascinating trade because Jeff McNeil will now not be a Pittsburgh Pirate. So there's another wrinkle in this. Now the Mets don't have that as a trade suitor. So is McNeil a feasible fit for the Seattle Mariners after we sign Jorge Polanco? Does that become more likely if Brendan Donovan is just too much for the Mariners to want to have a trade actually transpire and make happen? One has to wonder, what is the next play out of this? Because I think that there will be a domino effect not long after.
I think it'll be the Athletics if the Mets eat some of that contract. I think he goes to the Athletics. They're a team I'm highlighting, but this is interesting. Is Yandy Diaz, Mark Vientos and Jack Wenninger or Jonathan Santucci for Yandy Diaz? Cook it, make it happen. Give me Yandy, my dream come true. They're open for business, and they got a Rondo who can play first base. So give me Yandy. That's going to be fascinating. He's WARDY NYM. Subscribe to his YouTube. Subscribe here to Mets Daily. Smash that thumbs up on this video below. We appreciate support. WARDY, thanks for the time. We'll talk to you in the new year and hopefully with a new look Mets roster. I'm excited to see. I know a lot of fans are mad. I'm excited to see what they do because none of us have a clue. Me and you talk rumors every day, but we know nothing because no one knew Jorge Polanco was going to be a Met. We know nothing.
The only man who knows something, that's why you need to follow all of his work, is Will Salmon. Will Salmon, out of thin air, the night before the Polanco signing, literally said, oh, yeah, you know who could be a first base option on Baseball Night in New York? Jorge Polanco. You know, he hasn't really played there much because Salmon had this scoop. He just couldn't make it public until the AM the next day. So you're exactly right. We don't know what is exactly going to happen for Stearns. And credit to him for working stealthy this offseason because we didn't know about Nimmo prior for the most part. No one really knew outside of Devin Williams. No one knew about Polanco. No one knew about Lever unless you just connected the dots like I did because he made a lot of sense for the Mets as another former Yankee reliever. Most of the moves that the Mets are making have really come out of thin air. So hopefully, God willing, as we get in the new year, they make some moves that put a smile on Mets fans' faces instead of going pitchfork and fire and all.
Will Salmon a healthy fowl? Salmon's the healthiest thing I eat pretty much in my life. So shout out to Salmon and Salmon, the newest law firm in Queens. Happy holidays. Jake, WARDY, we'll talk to you Monday. Peace.